The morning alarm rang through the metal corridors of Sector 7. Kang Minho rolled off his thin sleeping mat and stretched his sore back. Another day of fixing broken machines in the biggest zoo in the galaxy. Another day of being invisible to the alien creatures who owned him. Minho had been working in the Vorthak Empire Zoo for 3 years now. Every day was the same. Wake up, eat the gray food paste, fix whatever was broken, go back to sleep. The Vorthak aliens who ran this place treated him like a useful tool. Nothing more. He grabbed his repair kit and walked down the long hallway. The zoo was massive. It covered 3 whole moons that orbited around the Vorthak capital world. Millions of creatures from thousands of different planets lived here. Most of them had been taken from their homes when the Vorthak Empire conquered their worlds. The zoo was divided into different sections. There was the water world section with giant sea monsters. There was the desert section with creatures that could survive in sandstorms. There was the ice section with furry beasts from frozen planets. Minho had worked in all of them. Today, he was going to Section 12. This was the premium area where the Vorthak kept their most valuable animals. Only the richest aliens could afford to visit this part of the zoo. The ticket cost more money than most beings made in a year. Minho walked past the first few exhibits. Giant lizards with 3 heads slept under artificial suns. Flying creatures with rainbow wings circled in tall glass towers. Everything here was designed to impress the visitors. The enclosures were bigger. The artificial environments were more detailed. He checked his work order. Power grid malfunction in Exhibit 7749. The same exhibit that had been having problems for weeks now. The maintenance log showed that other repair workers had tried to fix it multiple times. None of them had succeeded. When Minho reached Exhibit 7749, he stopped walking, his breath caught in his throat. Inside the massive enclosure was the most beautiful creature he had ever seen. It looked like a wolf, but it was much larger. Its fur was silver and seemed to glow with an inner light. When it moved, patterns of light danced across its body like the northern lights he remembered from Earth. The creature was pacing back and forth along the far wall of its prison. Its movements were smooth and powerful, but there was something else in the way it moved, something that made Minho's chest tight with sadness. The creature was lonely. Minho had seen enough caged animals to recognize the signs, the endless pacing, the way it kept its head down, the defeat in its posture. But this was different. This loneliness felt deeper, more intelligent. A group of Vorthak tourists walked up to the exhibit. They were tall, gray-skinned aliens with 4 arms and large black eyes. They pointed at the creature and made excited chittering sounds. "Look at the last star wolf," one of them said in the Vorthak language. "She is worth more than entire planets." "My offspring would love to see her," another tourist replied. "Such a rare specimen. The only one left in the entire galaxy. The only one left." The words hit Minho like a punch to the stomach. This beautiful creature was completely alone, the last of her kind in the whole universe. The star wolf lifted her head and looked directly at the tourists. Her eyes were silver, just like her fur. But they held an intelligence that made Minho shiver. Those were not the eyes of a simple animal. They were the eyes of someone who understood exactly what the tourists were saying. The tourists moved on to the next exhibit. Minho opened the maintenance panel and began working on the power grid. But he kept looking at the star wolf. She had stopped pacing and was now sitting perfectly still, watching him. Most animals in the zoo ignored the maintenance workers. They were used to seeing humans and other slave species working around their exhibits. But the star wolf seemed different. She was studying Minho with the same intensity that he was studying her. Minho finished replacing the burned-out power coupling and ran a diagnostic test. Everything was working properly now. He should pack up his tools and move on to the next job. That was what he was supposed to do. Instead, he stayed. The star wolf tilted her head to one side. It was such a familiar gesture, just like the dogs that Minho had known as a child on Earth. But there was something more complex in her expression. She was trying to figure him out. "Hello," Minho whispered in Standard Galactic. He felt foolish talking to an animal, but something made him want to try. The Starwolf's ears twitched. She stood up and walked closer to the energy barrier that kept her trapped. Her silver eyes never left his face. I know you can understand me, Minho continued. I can see it in your eyes. The creature made a soft sound. It was not exactly a growl or a whine. It was something musical, something that reminded Minho of singing. A Vorthak guard walked past the exhibit. He was one of the zoo security officers, big, armed, and mean. His name was Vextar, and he enjoyed making the slave workers suffer. Human, Vextar barked. Why are you wasting time? There are 6 more repair orders waiting. Just finishing up, sir, Minho replied quickly. He packed his tools and stood up. But before he left, he looked back at the Starwolf. She was still watching him. Her head was tilted to the other side now. There was something in her expression that he had never seen in any of the other zoo animals. Hope. That night, Minho could not sleep. He kept thinking about the Starwolf, about her silver eyes and the musical sound she had made, about the way the tourists had talked about her like she was just a thing to be looked at, about the loneliness he had seen in her movements. He had been a prisoner in this place for 3 years. He knew what it felt like to be trapped, to be treated like property instead of a person. But at least he was not the last human in the galaxy. At least he was not completely alone. The Starwolf was both. Minho made a decision. Tomorrow he would find a reason to go back to Exhibit 7749. Maybe there would be another power problem. Maybe the climate control would need adjustment. He would find some excuse. He wanted to talk to her again. He wanted to let her know that someone saw her as more than just a rare specimen in a cage. He wanted to remind her that she was not completely alone after all. Minho found his excuse the next morning. The environmental controls in Exhibit 7749 were running too hot. It was a small problem that would take at least an hour to fix properly. Perfect. When he arrived at the Starwolf's enclosure, she was already waiting by the energy barrier. Her silver eyes tracked his every movement as he set up his equipment. It was like she had been expecting him. Good morning, Minho said softly as he opened the control panel. I told you I would come back. The Starwolf made that musical sound again. This time, Minho paid closer attention. It was not random noise. There was a pattern to it. Different notes that rose and fell in specific ways. Almost like she was trying to talk to him. Over the next few days, Minho kept finding reasons to visit Exhibit 7749. A loose connection here, a calibration issue there. Each time, the Starwolf seemed more comfortable with his presence. She would sit closer to the barrier when he worked. Sometimes she would make those musical sounds while he was there. On his 4th visit, something amazing happened. The Starwolf began to glow. It started as a faint shimmer across her silver fur. Then patterns of light began to move across her body. They looked like constellations. Like star maps that Minho had studied during his brief time in space navigation school before the Vorthak captured him. The patterns were beautiful, but more than that, they seemed to have meaning. When the Starwolf made certain sounds, certain light patterns would appear. When she tilted her head in different directions, the lights would change. You are trying to communicate, Minho whispered in amazement. The Starwolf's ears perked up. The light patterns on her fur grew brighter and more complex. That evening, Minho went to find Dr. Park Soo-young. She was another human prisoner who worked in the zoo's research facility. Before her capture, she had been a xenobiologist who studied alien life forms. If anyone could help him understand what the Starwolf was doing, it would be her. Soo-young lived in the same dormitory section as Minho. Finding her was not difficult. Talking to her privately was harder. The Vorthak monitored their prisoners constantly. But Minho managed to catch her during the evening meal. I need your help with something, he said quietly as they sat at one of the metal tables. What kind of help? Soo-young asked. She was a small woman with intelligent eyes and graying hair. 3 years of imprisonment had made her careful about everything. There is a creature in the premium section. A star wolf. I think she is trying to communicate with me. Soo-young's eyes widened. A star wolf? I thought they were all extinct. There is one left. The Vorthak keeper in Exhibit 7749. She makes musical sounds and creates light patterns on her fur. I think it means something. Soo-young was quiet for a long moment. Then she leaned closer. Star wolves were legendary navigators, she whispered. Before the Vorthak destroyed their planet, they could travel between star systems without ships. They used some kind of natural connection to stellar radiation. How do you know this? I studied them years ago. There were rumors that they had a form of quantum consciousness, that they could sense the songs of stars themselves. Most scientists thought it was just folklore. Minho felt his heart racing. What if it was not folklore? Over the next week, Soo-young began visiting Exhibit 7749 with Minho. She brought small recording devices hidden in her research equipment. Together, they documented the star wolf's attempts at communication. The patterns became clearer with each visit. Certain light formations always appeared with specific sounds. The star wolf would point her nose toward different parts of the artificial sky in her enclosure while making different musical tones. She is trying to show us star charts, Soo-young realized during their 5th joint visit. Look at how she positions herself. She is indicating directions in space. The star wolf seemed to understand that they were finally beginning to comprehend her messages. Her attempts at communication became more frequent and more detailed, but their growing understanding brought a terrible realization. The star wolf was not just trying to talk to them, she was calling out to others of her kind. Every song, every light pattern was a desperate message sent into the void, hoping that somewhere in the galaxy another star wolf might hear her. She has been doing this for 20 years, Soo-young said sadly as they watched the magnificent creature perform her nightly ritual of songs and lights, calling for her family, for her pack, for anyone who might answer. But there is no one left to answer, Minho replied. The star wolf turned toward them, as if she had heard their conversation. Her silver eyes held such profound sadness that Minho felt tears on his cheeks. During this time, Lee Jinwoo joined their small group. He was a technical specialist who maintained the zoo's computer systems. Minho had known him for 2 years, but they had never been close friends. Jinwoo was quiet and kept to himself most of the time. But when Soo-young mentioned their project during one of their carefully arranged meetings, Jinwoo's interest was immediate. I have been monitoring unusual energy readings from Section 12, he told them. High-frequency quantum fluctuations that do not match any known technology. They have been getting stronger over the past few weeks. That matches when Minho started visiting her regularly, Soo-young realized. Jinwoo nodded. The star wolf is not just making light and sound, she is generating quantum signals. Real communication across interstellar distances. The 3 humans looked at each other with a mixture of excitement and fear. If the star wolf could really send messages across space, what else might she be capable of? Their answer came the next day when Commandant Vextar began asking questions about the increased activity in Exhibit 7749. The cruel Vorthak guard had noticed that the star wolf was behaving differently, more alert, more active. Someone has been spending too much time near the premium specimens, Vextar announced during the morning work assignments. Unauthorized contact with valuable exhibits will result in punishment. His black eyes scanned the assembled workers, lingering on Minho for several long seconds. The 3 humans realized their secret was no longer safe. They had to act soon, or their chance to help the star wolf would be lost forever. The breakthrough came during Minho's most dangerous visit yet to Exhibit 7749. Commandant Vextar had been watching the maintenance schedules more carefully. Any excuse to visit the premium section had to be perfect. Minho waited 3 days for a real problem to occur. When the water recycling system in the Star Wolf's enclosure finally malfunctioned, he moved quickly. This repair would require him to work inside the exhibit itself, behind multiple security barriers. The Star Wolf watched as Minho passed through each energy field. For the first time in weeks, they would be in the same space with no barriers. between them. Minho's hands shook as he worked on the water system controls. Soo-young had spent those 3 days analyzing their recordings. She had discovered something amazing about the Starwolf's communication patterns. Hidden within the musical tones were harmonic frequencies that matched the radiation signatures of specific stars. Her people had names that were based on stellar harmonics, Soo-young had explained the night before. Each Starwolf was named after the star song that was present when they were born. She had worked for hours to decode the most common pattern in the Starwolf's calls, the sequence that appeared in almost every message she sent into space. Her own name. Now Minho stood less than 10 feet from the magnificent creature. She had stopped pacing and was sitting perfectly still, watching him work. Her silver fur caught the artificial starlight in her enclosure, making her look like she was made of moonbeams. Minho finished the repair and stood up slowly. The Starwolf tilted her head, waiting. "I know your real name," Minho whispered. He took a deep breath and tried to recreate the complex harmony that Soo-young had taught him. It was difficult for human vocal cords to make the right sounds. He had to combine low humming with higher whistling tones while modulating the frequency. "Silver wind," he said in her own language. The effect was immediate and powerful. Silverwind's entire body began to glow with brilliant silver light. The patterns on her fur became so bright that Minho had to squint. She stood up and walked toward him with fluid grace. For a moment, Minho was afraid. Silverwind was much larger than he had realized. She could easily kill him if she wanted to. But when she reached him, she did something completely unexpected. She gently touched her nose to his hand. The contact sent a shock through Minho's entire body. Not painful, but overwhelming. Suddenly his mind was filled with images and sounds and feelings that were not his own. He saw vast forests of crystal trees that sang in the wind. He felt the joy of running with a pack across landscapes that sparkled with starlight. He experienced the deep connection between starwolves and the cosmic forces that flowed through the galaxy. And then he felt the terrible emptiness that had consumed Silverwind for 20 years. The crushing loneliness of being the only one left. The desperate hope that somewhere, somehow, others of her kind still existed. When the connection ended, both Minho and Silverwind were trembling. Tears streamed down Minho's face and silver light leaked from Silverwind's eyes like luminous tears. "I understand now," he whispered. "You are not just calling for other starwolves. You are calling for home." Silverwind made a complex series of musical tones. Even without the mind connection, Minho could hear the meaning. She was telling him about her world, about the crystal forests where her people had lived in harmony with the stellar winds, about the great hunts when entire packs would chase their prey across multiple star systems. She told him about the day the Vorthak ships had arrived, how they had strip-mined her planet for its rare stellar crystals, how they had hunted down every starwolf they could find. Most had been killed. A few had been captured for study. Silverwind had been the youngest, small enough to be kept alive as a curiosity, old enough to remember everything she had lost. Over the following visits, the communication between Minho and Silverwind became deeper and more complex. She began to share secrets that made his blood run cold. The Vorthak had not kept her alive, just for display. They had been using her quantum consciousness to enhance their navigation systems. Every time their war fleets needed to travel to distant systems, they would force Silverwind to tap into her connection with stellar radiation. She was being used as a living computer to help the Vorthak Empire expand and conquer new worlds. "They are using you to destroy other planets like yours," Minho realized with horror. Silverwind's response was a low, mournful song that spoke of guilt and helplessness. For 20 years, she had been forced to help the Vorthak Empire grow stronger. Every successful invasion had been partly her fault. When Minho shared this discovery with Soo-young and Jinwoo, their small group realized the true scope of what they were dealing with. Freeing Silverwind was not just about saving one creature. It was about removing a crucial weapon from the Vorthak war machine. Without her navigation abilities, their expansion into the outer galaxy would be much slower, Soo-young explained. Starwolf quantum consciousness can calculate hyperspace routes that would take normal computers years to figure out. Jinwoo, had been monitoring the data flows from Exhibit 7749. The connection to the main navigation center is active 24 hours a day. They are draining her constantly. That night, Minho could not sleep. He kept thinking about the images Silverwind had shared with him, the crystal forests, the pack hunts across star systems, the joy of running free under alien skies. And he thought about her current reality. 20 years in a cage, 20 years of being used as a tool of war. 20 years of calling out for family who would never answer. But something else had changed during their mental connection. Minho had felt something new in Silverwind's consciousness, something that had not been there before. Hope. Real hope. Not the desperate hope of her nightly calls to empty space, but the solid hope of someone who believed that change was finally possible. She had sensed something in Minho's mind during their connection. Something that convinced her that he was different from every other being she had encountered in captivity. She believed that he would help her escape. The problem was that Minho had no idea how they could possibly succeed. The zoo's security was overwhelming. The Vorthak military controlled 3 entire moons. Even if they could somehow free Silverwind from her exhibit, where could they go? But as he lay in his narrow bunk, listening to the hum of the space station's life support systems, Minho began to form the skeleton of a plan. It was dangerous, it was probably impossible. It was also their only chance. The plan had to wait for the stellar convergence. It was a rare astronomical event that happened only once every 7 years. 7 specific stars would align perfectly, creating a unique pattern of stellar radiation that could be seen across multiple star systems. Soo-young had discovered references to the convergence in her research about starwolf culture. According to the old legends, starwolves became much more powerful during these alignments. Their connection to cosmic forces was amplified beyond normal limits. If the legends are true, she explained to Minho and Jinwoo during one of their secret meetings, Silverwind might be able to break free on her own during the convergence. The next convergence was only 2 weeks away. 2 weeks to plan the most dangerous escape attempt in the history of the Vorthak Zoo. Jinwoo had been studying the security systems for months. The containment field around Exhibit 7749 is powered by 3 separate generators, he reported. If I can overload all 3 at the same time, there will be a window of about 30 seconds before the backup systems activate. 30 seconds. Is not enough time, Minho pointed out. It is if Silverwind is ready, Soo-young replied. During the convergence, she will not need more time than that. The bigger problem was what would happen after Silverwind escaped her enclosure. The zoo was surrounded by military patrols. There were guard stations on every level and automated defense systems throughout the facility. We need a distraction, Minho realized. Something big enough to draw attention away from Section 12. Soo-young smiled grimly. I have been working on that. The research facility has been developing new biological specimens for the Vorthak military. If some of those specimens were to be accidentally released, that is incredibly dangerous, Jinwoo warned. So is leaving Silverwind in that cage for the rest of her life, Minho replied. They spent the next 10 days refining their plan. Minho would be responsible for reaching Silverwind during the chaos and guiding her to the escape route. Soo-young would create the distraction by releasing the research specimens. Jinwoo would disable the security systems and try to commandeer a transport ship. It was a plan with 1,000 ways to fail and very few ways to succeed, but they had to try. 3 days before the convergence, disaster struck. Commandant Vextar had been monitoring the human prisoners more closely than they realized. He had noticed the secret meetings. He had tracked their unusual interest in Exhibit 749, and he had set a trap. When Minho arrived for what he thought was a routine maintenance call, Vextar was waiting with 4 armed guards. The human thinks he can make friends with our most valuable specimen, Vextar said with cruel amusement. How touching. Minho tried to act casual. I do not know what you mean, sir. I am just here to fix the environmental controls. There is nothing wrong with the environmental controls, Vextar replied. I checked them myself this morning. So why are you really here, human? Before Minho could answer, Silverwind appeared at the energy barrier. She had been hiding in the back of her enclosure. but now she moved forward with fluid grace. Her silver eyes locked onto Vextar with an intensity that made the Vorthak commandant take a step backward. "Ah," Vextar said, recovering his composure. "I see. The beast has become attached to you. How interesting." He gestured to his guards. "Take the human to detention. I want to know exactly what he has been doing here." As the guards moved toward Minho, Silverwind did something that shocked everyone present. She began to sing. It was not the musical communication that Minho had heard before. This was something deeper, more primal. The sound seemed to come from the very core of her being and resonated through the metal walls of the exhibit. The lights in the entire section began to flicker. The energy barrier around Silverwind's enclosure started to pulse with unstable energy. "Stop her," Vextar shouted to his guards. "Use the neural disruptors." But before the guards could act, the lights went out completely. Emergency power kicked, in a few seconds later, bathing everything in red light. In that brief moment of darkness, Minho heard Silverwind's voice in his mind. "Run," she told him. "Find the others. The convergence comes soon." When the lights returned, Minho was gone. He had used the confusion to slip away through the maintenance tunnels that he knew better than any Vorthak guard. Vextar was furious. "Find him," he ordered his troops. "Search every section of this facility, and double the security around Exhibit 749. Minho spent the next 2 days hiding in the deepest parts of the zoo's infrastructure. He managed to contact Suyong and Jinwoo through the maintenance communication system. They confirmed that Vextar had tripled the guard patrols and installed additional monitoring equipment throughout the facility. "The plan is compromised," Suyong told him during a brief encrypted conversation. "There is no way we can reach Silverwind now." But Minho refused to give up. "The convergence happens tomorrow night. This might be our only chance for 7 more years." "It is suicide," Jinwoo argued. "Even if we could get past the guards, the new security systems will detect us immediately." That night, as Minho hid in a ventilation shaft near Section 12, he could hear Silverwind singing again. But this time, her songs were different. Instead of the desperate calls he had heard before, these sounded like battle hymns. She was preparing for war. The stellar convergence began at exactly 2347 Galactic Standard Time. Minho watched through a maintenance port as the 7 stars aligned in perfect formation. The artificial sky in Silverwind's enclosure began to pulse with new patterns of light, and Silverwind began to change. Her silver fur became brilliant white. Patterns of starlight raced across her body in complex formations. Her eyes blazed with stellar fire. She was no longer just a star wolf. She was becoming something that legends were made of. The energy barrier around her enclosure began to crack under the pressure of her transformed presence. Vextar and his guards watched in amazement and growing fear as their most valuable prisoner prepared to break free. "Increase power to the containment field," Vextar ordered, but no containment field built by the Vorthak could hold a star wolf empowered by the stellar convergence. Silverwind threw back her head and howled. The sound shattered every piece of glass in Section 12. The containment field collapsed completely. Emergency alarms began screaming throughout the facility. In that moment of chaos, as guards scrambled to respond and automated systems failed, one by one Minho made his choice. He dropped down from the ventilation shaft and ran toward Silverwind. "I kept my promise," he shouted over the noise of the alarms. "I came back for you." Silverwind turned toward him, and for a moment Minho thought he had made a terrible mistake. The creature before him was no longer the sad, lonely being he had befriended. This was a force of nature, a living weapon powered by stellar energy. But then she spoke his name, and her voice was filled with gratitude and fierce joy. "Now we run," she told him. "Now we show them what freedom sounds like." Silverwind's escape was not just a breakout, it was an awakening. The moment she broke free from her containment field, every piece of quantum communication equipment in the Vorthak Empire began receiving the same signal. It was not words or images. It was pure emotion broadcast across the galaxy. The joy of freedom. The rage of 20 years of imprisonment. The desperate hope that others might still be alive. And across the vast emptiness of space, something answered. On a forgotten mining, colony in the outer rim. A creature that had been hiding among the rocky caves for 15 years lifted her head and howled back. On a smuggler's ship traveling between distant systems, an old star wolf who had been pretending to be a common space dog suddenly remembered who he really was. From hidden places throughout the galaxy, the survivors began to sing. Minho ran beside, Silverwind through the chaos of the zoo's emergency response. She moved like liquid starlight, flowing around obstacles and through crowds of panicking guards. Her stellar-powered transformation had made her faster and stronger than anything the Vorthak had ever seen. But she was also careful to stay close to Minho. Even in her transformed state, she remembered the human who had whispered her name through the bars of her cage. "Where are we going?" Minho gasped as they reached the main transport hub. "To find the others," Silverwind replied. Her voice now carried harmonics that seemed to come from the stars themselves. "Suyung and Jinwoo, they are part of our pack now." Suyung had succeeded in creating her distraction. The research facility was in complete chaos as dozens of experimental creatures rampaged through the corridors. But she had underestimated how dangerous some of those creatures would be. When Minho and Silverwind found her, she was trapped in a laboratory with 3 of the released specimens circling her position. Silverwind did not hesitate. She burst through the laboratory door with a sound like thunder. The experimental creatures took one look at her stellar-powered form and fled in terror. "I was beginning to think you were not coming," Suyung said with shaky relief. "We never leave pack members behind," Silverwind replied. They found Jinwoo in the transport bay fighting to override the security locks on a cargo ship. Vorthak guards were closing in on his position from 3 directions. This time it was Minho who acted, without hesitation. He had learned something from his connection with Silverwind. Sometimes the only way to save someone you care about is to be willing to fight for them. He grabbed a maintenance tool and charged the nearest group of guards. He was not a warrior, but he was desperate. And sometimes, desperation is more powerful than training. Silverwind's howl of approval echoed through the transport bay as she joined the fight. Together they cleared a path to the cargo ship. "Can you fly this thing?" Minho asked Jinwoo as they sealed the airlock behind them. "I can try," Jinwoo replied, his fingers dancing over the control panel. "But where are we going?" "The Vorthak. Military will be tracking us within minutes." "To the convergence point," Silverwind said. "The place where the 7 stars meet. That is where the others will gather." The cargo ship lifted off just as Commandant Vextar arrived in the transport bay with a full squad of heavily armed troops. Through the viewports, Minho could see the rage on the Vorthak's face as his most valuable prisoner escaped. But Vextar's anger was nothing compared to what was happening in the depths of space. The quantum signal that Silverwind had broadcast during her escape was still spreading across the galaxy, and it was carrying more than just emotion. It was carrying information, star charts, navigation data, the locations of Vorthak military bases and supply routes. For 20 years, the Vorthak had forced Silverwind to help them plan their conquest. Now she was using that same knowledge to help others fight back. As their stolen ship approached the convergence point, Minho saw something that took his breath away. Ships were arriving from every direction, not just Starwolf survivors, but representatives from dozens of species that had been conquered by the Vorthak Empire. "How did they know to come here?" he asked. "The song carries further than you think," Silverwind replied. "Every species that has felt the touch of Vorthak oppression heard the call to freedom." At the center of the gathering fleet was something even more amazing. A pack of 12 star wolves floated in the vacuum of space, their bodies glowing with stellar energy. They had traveled here without ships, riding the cosmic winds just as their ancestors had done. When Silverwind saw them, she began to cry tears of pure light. "I thought I was alone," she whispered. "For 20 years I thought I was the last." The pack leader, an ancient male with fur like silver starfire, spoke directly to her mind. "You were never alone, little sister. We have been hiding, waiting, for the right moment to strike back. Your courage has given us that moment." What followed was the greatest coordinated uprising in galactic history. The Starwolves used their quantum consciousness to disable Vorthak navigation systems across hundreds of star systems. The liberated species attacked military bases and freed slave colonies. The Vorthak Empire, which had seemed invincible for generations, began to crumble. But the real victory was smaller and more personal. Minho stood on the observation deck of their captured ship, watching as Silverwind ran with her pack through the stellar winds of the convergence point. She moved, with pure joy, her silver form dancing between the cosmic currents that had called to her for so long. She was free. She was home. She was no longer alone. "What happens now?" Suyung asked, joining him at the viewport. "Now we help rebuild," Minho replied. "The Vorthak destroyed a lot of worlds. It will take time to fix the damage." "And us?" Jinwoo asked. "What happens to the humans?" Silverwind's voice reached them through the ship's communication system. She was still running with the pack, but she had not forgotten her friends. "You are pack now," she told them. "Starwolves do not abandon their family. We will find you a new home. A place where humans can live free." 6 months later, Minho stood in a crystal forest on a world that had no name. The trees sang in the wind, their crystalline branches creating music that reminded him of Silverwind's first attempts at communication. This was the new homeworld that the Starwolves had found for their human friends. A planet where the aurora danced every night and the very air seemed to shimmer with possibility. Silverwind approached through the singing trees, her silver fur catching the light of 3 moons. She had chosen to spend part of her time here, helping the humans establish their new colony. "Do you miss Earth?" she asked, settling down beside him. Minho considered the question. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But Earth was never really home for me. Home is where your pack is." Silverwind made a sound that was part laugh and part song. Very wise for a human. Above them, the night sky was filled with ships. Not Vorthak warships, but vessels carrying freed slaves to new worlds, carrying messages between species that were learning to cooperate instead of conquer, carrying hope to every corner of the galaxy. The last Starwolf was no longer alone, and neither was anyone else. In the distance, other Starwolves began their nightly song. It was not a call of loneliness anymore. It was a celebration of freedom, a promise that the darkness of the Vorthak Empire was ending. And somewhere in that cosmic symphony, Minho thought he could hear the future, a future where no one would ever again be trapped behind bars while others looked on and did nothing. A future where every caged creature would have someone willing to whisper their name and remind them that they were not forgotten. The song of the Starwolves carried that promise across the galaxy, and the stars themselves seemed to listen.